Ninth grade was supposed to be another ordinary year in high school, just a routine stretch of classrooms, tests, and adolescent chaos. I didn't expect it to be memorable, at least not in the way it would become. But as soon as I walked into my first class with Ms. Reynolds, I realized this was going to be anything but ordinary. Ms. Reynolds was infamous throughout the school, and not for anything positive. Every student had a story about her, how she targeted the quiet ones, accused kids of things they didn't do, or humiliated students publicly for minor mistakes. She was particularly notorious for how she treated Muslim girls who wore headscarves, constantly insisting they remove them to prove they weren't hiding anything like headphones or devices in class. There were rumors floating around the hallways about parents complaining and administrators shaking their heads, but no one could seem to get her removed. It was a delicate balance of fear and power, and every student knew not to cross her. But somehow, it felt inevitable that trouble would find me. I wasn't the type of student who sought attention. I kept my head down, focused on my studies, and tried to navigate each day without incident. But that year, my life was complicated by type 1 diabetes, a condition that required constant vigilance and careful management. Part of my routine involved wearing an insulin pump, a small device clipped to my waist that regulated my blood sugar throughout the day. I was used to adjusting it discreetly, ensuring that no one even noticed it, except, of course, Ms. Reynolds. I had already learned to keep my distance from her, to avoid her scrutiny, and to try my best not to provoke her attention. It wasn't easy, but I thought I could manage. Until the final exam. Final exams carried the usual stress, the pressure of passing, the looming shadow of grades, and the unspoken competition among classmates. That day was particularly hot, the kind of oppressive heat that made it almost unbearable to sit in a crowded classroom, pencils slipping from sweaty fingers and papers sticking to desks. I had chosen a lighter shirt that morning, one that allowed air to circulate and kept me from overheating. It was a simple choice, one that in any other year would have been meaningless. But as I later learned, it would become a critical factor in the chaos that unfolded. My blood sugar was low that day, which was dangerous in itself, and I had carefully checked my insulin pump before entering class, ensuring everything was functioning properly. I didn't realize that every small decision I made that day would lead directly to one of the most terrifying experiences of my young life. The exam began like any other, the quiet hum of pencils scratching paper filling the room. Ms. Reynolds stood at the front at first, scanning the room with her usual piercing gaze. Students shifted in their seats, trying to remain calm, aware of her reputation for scrutiny. Some kids, knowing her obsession with catching cheaters, had found clever ways to sneak headphones or devices during tests. It was a known tactic, and Ms. Reynolds was relentless in her monitoring, walking the aisles and sometimes accusing students of cheating on the slightest suspicion. Most of the students I sat near tried to hide nervous glances, keeping their focus on the test, but the tension was palpable. I, on the other hand, was focused purely on passing, carefully navigating questions and monitoring my own blood sugar levels. My mind was entirely consumed with the calculations of the exam, the mechanical functions of my insulin pump, and the oppressive heat in the room. About halfway through the exam, she stood up to patrol the room. I felt my heart rate spike slightly, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I knew how vigilant she could be, how quickly she could misinterpret even the most innocent actions. I tried to ignore her presence and concentrate on my answers, adjusting the pump on my waist to account for the low blood sugar I had been battling all morning. I was careful, subtle, thinking no one was paying attention to me. But in that split second when she approached, everything changed. I felt her presence behind me before I even registered it fully. Two simultaneous shocks occurred. First, she grabbed my test paper off my desk and declared, without hesitation, that I had failed. My brain froze, processing the accusation, trying to understand what had provoked such an immediate condemnation. I was still trying to find my voice to protest when I felt her hands on my waist. My heart began pounding erratically. Confusion turned to panic as I realized she was holding a pair of scissors. My insulin pump, my lifeline, was in her hands, and a wire connected to it was dangling from my body. It clicked in that horrifying moment. She had mistaken my medical device for a headphone, for cheating. The world narrowed down to the sound of the pump beeping, a sharp, piercing alarm that echoed in my ears. Students around me froze, their eyes widening as they noticed the device and the wire dangling from my waist. The heat, the exam, the fear, all of it collided into a blur of chaos. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words failed me, caught in the lump of shock lodged in my throat. Ms. Reynolds' face turned pale as realization dawned on her. She had not simply accused me. She had severed the tube of my insulin pump with scissors. The danger was immediate and visceral. Without the pump functioning, my blood sugar could spike or crash within minutes, and the consequences were severe. I stumbled toward the nurse's office, my legs weak, vision blurring, and every step a battle against dizziness that threatened to pull me to the floor. I remember gripping the counter for support as the nurse called 911. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming, mixed with a growing fear for my own life. My classmates were whispering, some coming closer in concern, while others watched in stunned silence. The world had reduced to the rhythmic beeping of the pump, the voices of adults rushing to help, and the gnawing, terrifying awareness of what could have happened if I hadn't acted quickly. The ambulance ride to the hospital was surreal. I lay on the stretcher, gripping the sides, aware of every sound, every movement, and every passing car. Nurses and paramedics spoke calmly, trying to reassure me, but I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. In that moment, the fear of death, the panic of misunderstanding, and the surreal sense of injustice all collided. I realized, with startling clarity, how fragile life could be and how easily mistakes, or assumptions, could spiral into life-threatening situations. When I finally arrived at the emergency room, tests were run, my blood sugar stabilized, and I was monitored carefully. The sense of relief was enormous, but the memory of that moment, the scissors, the beeping, the stunned silence of my classmates, would never fully leave me. And the irony was not lost on me. I had survived one of the scariest experiences of my life, but as a result, I developed a new habit. From that day forward, I wore headphones in class, not to cheat, but because no teacher would ever dare mistake them for a life-saving medical device again. The days following the hospital visit were surreal, a strange mixture of relief, fear, and disbelief. I had survived what could have been a life-threatening incident, but the reality of what had happened didn't fully sink in until I returned to school. Walking into the building felt different. The hallways seemed narrower, the fluorescent lights harsher, and every glance felt loaded with potential judgment. Students whispered as I passed, some sympathetic, others curious, and a few, probably like myself, replaying the terrifying scene over and over in their minds. The tension wasn't just in me. It was in the air, palpable and heavy, seeping into classrooms and conversations. Returning to Ms. Reynolds' classroom was almost unbearable. Every desk, every chair, every pencil seemed to carry the memory of that terrifying moment. I wasn't sure how to sit without feeling a wave of panic, or how to focus on the lesson without my thoughts spiraling. The first day back, I made sure to wear long sleeves to cover the insulin pump, though I knew it wasn't going to prevent any assumptions. It was just a small layer of protection against further scrutiny. Every time she passed behind me, I felt a shiver run down my spine, the memory of the scissors slicing through my tube flashing vividly in my mind. The incident had changed my perception of safety in a place that was supposed to be routine, ordinary, and controlled. Teachers and administrators were aware of the situation, and I could sense the tension in the hallways as they whispered about what had happened. Ms. Reynolds was avoiding eye contact, her face pale, her posture rigid. She hadn't apologized directly, but there were murmurs that the incident had been reported to the principal and that disciplinary measures might follow. The thought was small comfort. I had survived physically, but the psychological impact lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about how quickly an innocent mistake, a misinterpretation, or an assumption could spiral into something dangerous. Every glance toward the back of the classroom, every sudden movement from a teacher, made me question my surroundings, my safety, and even my own reactions. The next few classes were emotionally exhausting. Every minor interaction with her carried the weight of the past event. I could hear whispers around me as classmates discussed what had happened, some in disbelief, others laughing nervously at the absurdity, but all aware of the danger that had just been so narrowly avoided. I tried to keep my focus on assignments, tests, and routine activities, but the background anxiety was persistent. Each beep of my insulin pump, though it was now intact and functioning properly, triggered a sudden jolt of fear. I had become hyper-aware of every sound, every movement, and every potential misunderstanding, knowing firsthand how quickly a simple assumption could escalate into a life-threatening scenario. At home, I struggled with a strange mixture of anger, fear, and reflection. I thought about the absurdity of being mistaken for cheating when I had been managing a serious medical condition. I replayed the incident repeatedly in my mind, analyzing every detail. The way she had approached me, the moment she grabbed the scissors, the look of shock on her face when she realized her mistake. I also reflected on my own reactions, realizing how instinctively I had focused on survival, getting to the nurse, calling for help, and staying conscious long enough to receive treatment. I knew that the experience would remain with me for a lifetime, shaping how I approached authority, safety, and personal boundaries. School administration took notice, and there were a series of meetings involving my parents, Ms. Reynolds, and the principal. The discussions were tense. My parents were furious, insisting that her actions were reckless and dangerous. They recounted the risks associated with tampering with medical devices, explaining in detail how such negligence could have led to severe complications or even death. Ms. Reynolds, still pale and visibly shaken, stammered through apologies and explanations, insisting that she had only assumed I was cheating. The principal attempted to mediate, balancing concern for student safety with the teacher's perspective, but the tension in the room was undeniable. It became painfully clear that no one fully appreciated how close the situation had come to disaster until it happened, and even then, the fear and incredulity lingered. As the days turned into weeks, I developed new routines to ensure I could manage both my diabetes and my personal safety. I started wearing headphones in class, not to cheat, but to create a small buffer between myself and potential scrutiny. The headphones allowed me to manage my insulin pump discreetly while focusing on my studies without fear of immediate intervention or misinterpretation. Every action I took, from the way I adjusted my clothing to how I navigated classroom interactions, was influenced by the memory of that day. It was a constant reminder that ordinary moments could quickly escalate into extraordinary danger. Even with precautions, every exam and classroom activity carried a lingering anxiety. I could feel the adrenaline spike whenever a teacher approached too quickly, every glance carrying an undercurrent of potential accusation. Friends whispered support, trying to reassure me, but I could sense the invisible weight of caution that had now become part of my daily life. It was a strange combination of vigilance and resilience, learning to navigate a school environment that had become unpredictably perilous. The incident had taught me that safety isn't always obvious, that authority isn't always infallible, and that even ordinary routines can carry extraordinary risk. Despite the fear, there were moments of quiet triumph. I successfully completed subsequent tests without incident, demonstrating to myself that I could navigate the classroom, manage my medical needs, and withstand scrutiny without collapsing under pressure. Every day felt like a small victory, a testament to resilience and adaptability. Yet the underlying lesson remained. A single misunderstanding could escalate rapidly, and the capacity to act decisively under pressure could mean the difference between minor inconvenience and life-threatening danger. Returning to the classroom after the hospital visit was a test of courage I hadn't anticipated. The air felt different that day, thick with anticipation and the weight of unspoken memories. Students who had witnessed the incident still glanced at me occasionally, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief, concern, and curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, careful not to be too obvious, while others avoided eye contact entirely. The dynamics of the class had shifted overnight. What had once been a relatively normal room of teenagers had transformed into a space charged with tension, a subtle undercurrent that reminded me constantly of how close I had come to serious harm. Ms. Reynolds' presence in the room was suffocating. She walked with a measured pace, her eyes darting quickly but purposefully from student to student, pausing occasionally to check papers or adjust her posture. I could see the lingering unease in her expression, the faint tremor in her hands whenever she picked up a pen or touched her glasses. There was a mixture of fear and embarrassment etched across her face, fear of repercussions and embarrassment over the sheer magnitude of her mistake. I felt a complicated swirl of emotions toward her. Anger for the danger she had caused, disbelief at her assumptions, but also a strange sense of responsibility for keeping myself calm and ensuring nothing escalated further. I realized that surviving an event like this didn't end when the immediate danger passed. It carried forward into every interaction, every glance, every decision I made. That day, I noticed how careful I had become in every action. Adjusting my insulin pump no longer felt casual. It required conscious attention, calculated movements to ensure that nothing would be misinterpreted. Even sitting at my desk, I measured how much space I took up, how visible my device was, and how my shirt draped over it. Friends offered support quietly, some expressing admiration for the way I had handled the hospital visit, while others admitted their fear of what might have happened. The conversations were awkward, layered with teenage awkwardness and the heavy reality of the situation. I learned that peer support could be comforting, but it also highlighted just how extraordinary the incident had been, something that no one in our grade would forget anytime soon. The administration's involvement grew over the next few days. Meetings were scheduled with my parents, the principal, and even school counselors. They discussed protocols, teacher training, and the serious risks associated with misunderstanding medical devices. I sat in these meetings, quietly observing, occasionally interjecting with details about the incident. My parents were visibly shaken but focused, their questions precise, highlighting how fragile safety can be in environments where authority is misapplied. Ms. Reynolds was present, her hands folded tightly in her lap, nodding along but speaking sparingly. She seemed almost fragile, a stark contrast to the formidable figure she had been in class. I realized that the incident had affected not just me, but also her, though in a profoundly different way. She had underestimated the consequences of her actions, and now the repercussions were unavoidable. Meanwhile, the subtle changes in classroom dynamics became more apparent. Some students were hesitant to speak aloud, fearing scrutiny or being dragged into uncomfortable situations. Others were overly cautious in their movements, mimicking my careful handling of my own belongings. Group activities were approached with tentative caution, collaborative projects were tempered by nervous glances, and even passing notes seemed fraught with tension. The ordinary chaos of teenage interactions had been replaced with a measured, almost clinical awareness of surroundings. It was a reminder that trauma affects not only the directly involved, but everyone in the environment, creating a ripple effect that can subtly alter behaviors and social norms. Outside the classroom, the hallways became another battlefield of awareness. Teachers passed with heightened attention, whispering to one another, exchanging looks that conveyed concern without words. Students moved cautiously, some clutching their backpacks closer to their bodies, others avoiding certain sections of the hallway entirely. I noticed that my own awareness had sharpened. Every sound, every sudden movement, and even the casual glance of a stranger became a potential signal for danger. It was exhausting but necessary. I understood that in the aftermath of an incident like this, survival required more than physical safety. It demanded mental acuity, emotional resilience, and the ability to anticipate what might go wrong. Tests and assignments after the incident became sources of anxiety in a new way. The physical act of taking a test no longer felt neutral. It carried the weight of possibility, the fear of misinterpretation, and the vigilance of monitoring my own medical needs. I developed routines, checking my pump discreetly, arranging my desk to minimize exposure, and keeping a calm expression at all times. These routines were both protective and psychologically taxing. Every day was a lesson in navigating a world where misunderstanding could have immediate, life-threatening consequences. My classmates noticed these subtle adjustments, some asking questions quietly, others remaining silent but clearly observing. Even small, routine interactions became layered with caution. When I raised my hand to ask a question, I measured my tone and inflection. When I wrote on the board, I ensured that my actions were deliberate and obvious. Lunchtime conversations were approached with the same careful attention to detail, balancing the need for normal social interactions with the underlying reality that one wrong assumption could have catastrophic consequences. I realized that my life, at least in that moment, had become a constant exercise in vigilance, observation, and risk management. By the end of the week, I had begun to notice subtle improvements. The initial shock and hypervigilance were giving way to a cautious resilience. My classmates, though still aware, began to relax slightly in my presence. Ms. Reynolds maintained a tense distance, but no longer hovered excessively, possibly learning her own lessons in accountability and the consequences of assumption. I found moments of normalcy creeping back into my days. Brief laughter in the hall, whispered jokes about something entirely unrelated, and even small victories in completing assignments without incident. These moments were fleeting but precious, reinforcing the idea that while trauma reshapes experiences, recovery, even partial recovery, is possible. And yet, the memory of the scissors, the beeping of the insulin pump, and the immediate terror I had felt remained vivid. Every day was a balance between moving forward and carrying the lessons of that day with me. I understood that my vigilance would need to continue, that the awareness I had developed was not temporary, but an essential skill for managing both my medical condition and navigating a world where assumptions could have dangerous consequences. I had survived, yes, but survival came with a new level of awareness, a sharper perception of risk, and a recognition that ordinary spaces can become extraordinary in the blink of an eye. The following week felt surreal, almost dreamlike, as I returned fully to the rhythm of school life, while carrying the invisible weight of what had happened. Walking through the hallways, I noticed the way people's eyes lingered just a fraction longer when I passed. Some were curious, others concerned, and a few simply whispering with that unmistakable teenage mix of fascination and fear. It wasn't malicious. It was just a reflection of the enormity of what had happened. To them, I had been involved in a near-catastrophic incident that no one had ever experienced firsthand, and now the story hung in the air, like an unspoken reality everyone was tiptoeing around. The teachers were noticeably more cautious around me as well. Ms. Reynolds avoided direct contact, sometimes sitting at her desk in silence for longer periods than usual, her expression etched with tension. Other teachers occasionally cast sympathetic glances or whispered quietly in the staff room, likely discussing what had happened and how serious it had been. I couldn't help but feel the surreal blend of fear, gratitude, and lingering anger. I was grateful to be alive, yet I felt frustrated and vulnerable, knowing that a simple misunderstanding had escalated to life-threatening proportions. Every movement, every glance, and every action in the classroom became part of an invisible calculus of survival. At home, I wrestled with the emotions that the incident had stirred up. My parents were more attentive than ever, checking my insulin levels, monitoring my routines, and making sure I was okay physically and mentally. There were long conversations about how I felt, how the event had affected my confidence, and how we could prevent anything like this from ever happening again. They were supportive but visibly shaken, and their concern was both comforting and overwhelming. It was difficult to balance the normal teenage desire for independence with the reality of needing constant care and vigilance, especially in a school environment where misunderstandings could have disastrous consequences. Meanwhile, the administration began taking steps to prevent similar incidents in the future. There were policy reviews, staff meetings, and mandatory training sessions on handling medical devices in classrooms. Teachers were instructed on how to identify medical equipment versus potential cheating devices, and emergency protocols were revisited. While this provided a sense of institutional support, it also served as a constant reminder that the incident had been serious enough to necessitate major administrative action. The weight of responsibility was no longer just personal. It had become a systemic concern. In class, I noticed subtle shifts in how my peers behaved around me. Some students seemed hesitant to draw attention to themselves, likely reflecting the heightened awareness the incident had instilled in all of us. Others became overly cautious in how they handled tests or their own devices, mirroring my own strategies for minimizing exposure and avoiding misunderstandings. Despite the unease, small moments of connection began to emerge. Whispered jokes, subtle gestures of support, and classmates checking in on me quietly. These small interactions provided a glimmer of normalcy in a world that had felt anything but normal just days before. Tests remained particularly stressful. Every time an exam rolled around, my body tensed, my mind raced, and my awareness of my surroundings sharpened. The fear of misinterpretation lingered like a shadow, shaping how I moved, how I adjusted my insulin pump, and how I navigated the physical space of the classroom. I developed meticulous routines, sitting in the same spot, adjusting my shirt in specific ways, and using my headphones not just for focus, but as a subtle shield against misunderstanding. The hypervigilance was exhausting, but it became necessary. I had survived one incident, but I understood now that survival required constant awareness, careful planning, and a readiness to act in an instant. Outside of class, social dynamics were subtly altered. Friends who had once joked casually now approached interactions with caution. Conversations were measured, laughter was tempered, and even ordinary gestures felt slightly loaded with meaning. I noticed how quickly rumors and assumptions could spread, and how easily a single moment could redefine the way peers viewed each other. It was a lesson in the power of perception and in the fragility of trust and safety, even in an environment designed for learning. At the same time, I experienced moments of empowerment. The incident, while terrifying, had also taught me resilience, resourcefulness, and the ability to maintain composure under extreme stress. I realized that my quick thinking, getting to the nurse, alerting adults, and staying conscious had prevented a potentially life-threatening situation from escalating further. Each small victory in navigating daily routines became a reminder of my own capability, even as I carried the lingering trauma of the event. By the end of the week, I had begun to notice gradual improvements in both my emotional state and my confidence at school. The fear hadn't disappeared. It never would completely, but I was learning to manage it, to compartmentalize it, and to continue functioning despite it. Small routines became anchors, checking my pump discreetly, wearing headphones, and sitting strategically in the classroom. These practices were both protective and empowering, providing a sense of control in an environment that had once felt chaotic and unpredictable. Yet, even as life returned to a semblance of normalcy, the memory of Ms. Reynolds, the scissors, and the beeping insulin pump lingered vividly. It was a reminder of how quickly ordinary routines could spiral into danger, and how important it was to be prepared, vigilant, and capable of acting decisively. The experience had reshaped not only my perception of school, but also my understanding of trust, authority, and person. Our responsibility. I knew that while the immediate crisis had passed, the lessons of that day would remain with me indefinitely, guiding my decisions, my awareness, and my interactions with the world around me. As the weeks turned into months after the incident, life at school slowly regained its rhythm, but it was a rhythm tinged with awareness and caution. Each day carried the subtle weight of the previous chaos, a reminder that ordinary moments could suddenly become extraordinary. Students, teachers, and administrators were all aware of the event now, and the stories had spread beyond our classroom walls. Whispers and cautious glances followed me through hallways, cafeteria lines, and even sports events. While some students expressed genuine concern and curiosity, others seemed almost fascinated by the drama, replaying the incident like a cautionary tale. I had to navigate these interactions carefully, learning to manage both my feelings and my image among peers who didn't always understand the gravity of what had happened. Ms. Reynolds' presence continued to loom over the classroom, a constant reminder of how quickly authority could become a source of danger. She maintained an awkward distance from me, sometimes avoiding eye contact entirely, but at other moments her scrutiny seemed sharper than ever. I noticed the subtle ways she tried to adjust her behavior, checking papers more slowly, walking around the room with exaggerated caution, but the memory of her scissors and her assumptions never fully faded. It was a strange mixture of fear and triumph. I had survived, yes, but the psychological impact remained, shaping every interaction and every classroom experience. Administrative oversight increased noticeably after the incident. Meetings were held to review policies, ensure teachers were trained on medical devices, and prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. School counselors were more involved, checking in on students and offering guidance. While these measures provided a sense of security, they also served as constant reminders that the incident had been serious enough to prompt permanent procedural changes. I realized that my survival had created ripples beyond my own experience, influencing the entire school's approach to safety, awareness, and responsibility. Meanwhile, my own routines and coping mechanisms became more refined. I wore my headphones consistently, not as a tool for distraction, but as a protective shield, ensuring that no one could mistake my insulin pump for a cheating device. Every adjustment of the pump became deliberate, measured, and calculated. I learned to manage my own anxiety in real time, maintaining a calm exterior even when fear threatened to overwhelm me. This vigilance became part of my identity, an invisible armor that allowed me to function in an environment that had once felt unpredictable and dangerous. Social dynamics in the classroom shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. Some students became more cautious, mirroring my own heightened awareness, while others approached me quietly, expressing concern, empathy, or curiosity. Friendships evolved, with a few peers standing out as particularly supportive, offering reassurance or simply sharing small moments of connection. These relationships became lifelines, reinforcing my sense of belonging and providing emotional anchors in the turbulent aftermath. The incident had created a new lens through which everyone viewed each other, one that highlighted vulnerability, resilience, and the complexity of human behavior in moments of crisis. Tests and assignments remained a source of tension, but I approached them with a new sense of agency. I learned to anticipate scrutiny, manage my medical needs discreetly, and maintain composure even under pressure. Each successful completion of an exam or assignment became a quiet triumph, a reminder of my own resilience and adaptability. While the fear lingered, it no longer controlled me entirely. Instead, it became a tool for preparedness, a heightened awareness that allowed me to navigate challenges with both caution and confidence. At home, the conversations with my parents continued, deepening my understanding of the incident's significance. We discussed not only the immediate danger, but also the broader lessons about accountability, vigilance, and personal safety. They encouraged me to reflect on the experience, to recognize both my courage and the risks inherent in ordinary environments. These discussions were emotionally charged, sometimes bringing tears or frustration, but ultimately they strengthened our bond and reinforced the importance of awareness, preparedness, and mutual support. The school's community gradually began to shift as well. Teachers incorporated discussions about safety and responsibility into lessons, while students engaged in conversations about empathy, respect, and the consequences of assumptions. The incident became a catalyst for learning, not only about medical conditions and classroom protocols, but also about human behavior, authority, and resilience. I realized that what had begun as a terrifying personal experience had transformed into an opportunity for education, awareness, and growth, not just for me, but for everyone in the school community. Even as recovery continued, the memory of that day remained vivid. The scissors, the beeping insulin pump, and the tense moments in the classroom replayed in my mind with clarity, a reminder of both the danger I had faced and the quick thinking that had saved me. I understood now that survival was not simply a matter of luck. It required awareness, preparation, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. These lessons, though hard-earned, became a foundation for resilience, shaping my perspective, my behavior, and my interactions for years to come. By the end of the semester, I felt a cautious sense of empowerment. The immediate fear had subsided, replaced by an understanding of my own strength, resilience, and capacity for vigilance. While Ms. Reynolds remained a challenging presence, and while the memory of the incident lingered, I had learned to navigate the classroom, my peers, and my own medical needs with confidence. I had survived, grown, and learned lessons that extended far beyond the walls of any classroom, a testament to both the fragility and the resilience of life, and a reminder that even ordinary spaces can harbor extraordinary challenges. By the time the new semester rolled around, the atmosphere at school had changed in subtle but profound ways. What had once been the ordinary cadence of ninth grade was now underscored by a collective awareness of how easily things could spiral out of control. Teachers were more careful, administrators more vigilant, and students, myself included, more conscious of the delicate balance between authority and personal boundaries. The incident with Ms. Reynolds had created ripples that affected the entire school, shaping interactions, policies, and even the way we thought about our daily routines. Ms. Reynolds herself was noticeably different. The confidence and assertiveness that had once defined her classroom presence were replaced by caution and, at times, visible anxiety. Every step she took, Every interaction she had seemed to carry the weight of that day's mistake. There were whispered conversations among staff about retraining, counseling sessions, and the school's concern about her professional judgment. Though she had never fully apologized directly to me in front of the class, her demeanor spoke volumes. The pale face, hesitant gestures, and careful approach suggested she had internalized the severity of what had occurred. The incident had shifted the power dynamic, leaving her in a position of accountability she had likely never anticipated. For me, the experience had fostered an unexpected level of self-awareness and resilience. I found myself navigating the classroom with a combination of caution and assertiveness, balancing the need for vigilance with the desire to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Every action I took, adjusting my insulin pump, sitting in my assigned spot, or even participating in discussions, was infused with the memory of that terrifying day. The fear that had once threatened to overwhelm me had been transformed into a skill, heightened awareness, and careful decision-making that allowed me to function effectively while minimizing risk. Social dynamics continued to evolve as well. Some classmates, inspired by the way I had handled the incident, became more mindful and empathetic. They asked questions about diabetes, medical devices, and personal safety, fostering a culture of understanding that had been absent before. Others were more cautious, perhaps recognizing that ordinary assumptions could have extraordinary consequences. The incident had created a shared experience that connected us all, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of awareness, empathy, and responsibility. It was a strange mix of fear and growth, anxiety and empowerment, woven into the daily fabric of our school lives. Administration and staff meetings became more focused on prevention and education. Teachers were trained on recognizing medical devices, understanding student health needs, and avoiding assumptions that could jeopardize safety. Emergency protocols were reviewed and reinforced, not just for my own safety, but for the safety of all students. These measures, while reassuring, served as a constant reminder of the severity of the incident. I became acutely aware that what had happened to me could happen to anyone if vigilance and awareness were lacking. It was a sobering realization, but one that strengthened my resolve to remain attentive and prepared. At home, the conversations with my parents deepened my understanding of responsibility and accountability. We discussed not only the immediate dangers, but also the broader implications, the importance of advocating for oneself, the value of understanding authority figures, and the need to maintain composure in moments of crisis. My parents were proud of the way I had handled myself, but they also stressed that the incident was a lesson in vigilance, preparedness, and the sometimes unpredictable nature of human behavior. These discussions helped me process the experience and reinforce the importance of both self-care and situational awareness in navigating daily life. As the months progressed, I noticed subtle changes in my own behavior and mindset. The incident had instilled a level of caution that extended beyond the classroom. I became more observant, more deliberate in my actions, and more aware of the potential consequences of even minor decisions. At the same time, I also discovered a newfound sense of confidence and self-reliance. Surviving a potentially life-threatening situation had shown me that I could remain calm under pressure, act decisively, and advocate for my own safety. These lessons, though born of fear, became powerful tools for navigating both academic and personal challenges. Interactions with classmates continued to reflect a mix of curiosity, empathy, and caution. Some students approached me with questions, wanting to understand what had happened and how I had managed to stay calm. Others offered small gestures of support, whether through a friendly smile, a whispered word of encouragement, or subtle acts of consideration in group projects. These moments, though quiet, were meaningful. They reflected the way shared experiences can foster empathy, understanding, and stronger connections among peers. I realized that the incident had not only shaped my own perspective, but had also influenced the broader classroom culture, encouraging both awareness and compassion. Despite the passage of time, the memory of the scissors and the beeping insulin pump remained vivid. It was a reminder that ordinary environments can become dangerous in an instant, and that vigilance, preparedness, and quick thinking can make the difference between harm and safety. I carried this awareness with me everywhere, in the classroom, at home, in social interactions, and even in moments of quiet reflection. It became part of my identity, a layer of consciousness that informed my actions, decisions, and interactions with the world around me. By the end of the semester, I felt a tentative sense of closure. The immediate crisis had passed, the administrative measures were in place, and the classroom environment had regained a level of stability. Yet I knew that the lessons of that day, the importance of awareness, the fragility of safety, and the power of quick thinking would remain with me indefinitely. I had survived, grown, and learned, and I understood that these lessons were far more valuable than any test or grade. They were lessons about life, resilience, and the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. By the time the following school year began, the ripple effects of that fateful day with Ms. Reynolds had become deeply embedded in the school's culture. Teachers approached their classrooms with a new mindfulness, parents became more involved in safety discussions, and students, myself included, carried a heightened sense of awareness in their everyday actions. The event that had seemed like a private nightmare had now transformed into a pivotal moment for the entire school community, one that would influence how authority, accountability, and personal responsibility were perceived for years to come. Ms. Reynolds' presence in the classroom had shifted dramatically. Gone was the imposing authority figure who patrolled the aisles with sharp eyes and unrelenting suspicion. In her place was a teacher carefully balancing vigilance with restraint, conscious of every movement and every interaction. She still carried the weight of her mistake. The pale expression, the hesitant gestures, and the slight tremor in her voice were constant reminders. But she had learned, albeit painfully, the consequences of acting without understanding. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of accountability, a quiet but powerful lesson in humility and restraint. I noticed the change daily, in subtle ways. The way she adjusted her pace, how she checked students' needs before assumptions, and the careful attention she gave to every classroom interaction. For me, the incident had evolved into a defining chapter of personal growth. I had moved from fear and panic to cautious resilience. Every day presented opportunities to apply the lessons I had learned: situational awareness, careful observation, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. I developed routines that helped me navigate both academic and social life. Wearing headphones in class, adjusting my insulin pump discreetly, and maintaining a calm exterior had become habits that ensured both my safety and my confidence. I was no longer simply reacting to fear. I was actively managing my environment, using the skills I had honed during the incident to navigate challenges effectively. Socially, I had become more empathetic and observant. The experience had given me a unique perspective on how small actions could have enormous consequences. I noticed when classmates were anxious, hesitant, or in need of support. I became someone they could rely on, not as a teacher or authority figure, but as a peer who had navigated an extraordinary situation and come out stronger. My relationships deepened, and my interactions carried a subtle but powerful awareness of vulnerability, trust, and the importance of thoughtful communication. The classroom environment, once dominated by fear and uncertainty, had transformed into a space where empathy and awareness were quietly nurtured. Administration took further steps to institutionalize the lessons learned. Policies on handling medical devices, student safety, and teacher accountability were formalized. Mandatory training sessions for all staff emphasized the importance of understanding students' needs before making assumptions. The school also initiated awareness programs for students, highlighting the importance of empathy, observation, and responsible behavior. These measures created a more secure and supportive environment, ensuring that no student would face the kind of danger I had experienced. The incident had sparked systemic change, turning a personal trauma into a broader opportunity for growth and improvement. Despite the progress, the memory of that day remained vivid in my mind. I could recall the scissors, the beeping insulin pump, and the rush to the nurse's office with crystal clarity. These memories were not merely traumatic, they were instructive. They reinforced the necessity of vigilance, the importance of quick decision-making, and the delicate balance between fear and action. I had survived because I remained calm, acted decisively, and trusted my instincts. Those lessons, though learned under extreme circumstances, became invaluable tools for navigating life, both in and out of school. As time went on, The incident became a story of resilience rather than fear. Teachers, students, and administrators often reflected on it as a case study in awareness, preparedness, and accountability. While the initial shock had been overwhelming, it had sparked growth for everyone involved. I took pride in knowing that my experience had contributed to positive change, creating a safer, more informed school community. The incident had transformed from a personal crisis into a shared lesson, one that highlighted the interconnectedness of safety, responsibility, and empathy. Looking back, I realized that survival was not the only outcome of that day. I had gained insight into human behavior, the complexity of authority, and the importance of proactive self-care. I had learned that fear could be transformed into preparedness, panic into vigilance, and trauma into growth. My relationship with my own resilience had deepened, and I understood that even in the most ordinary environments, extraordinary lessons could be found. The incident with Ms. Reynolds, once a source of terror, had ultimately become a catalyst for personal and communal development, leaving a lasting impact that extended far beyond the walls of any classroom. The final months of that school year brought a sense of closure, though the memory of that day remained a quiet presence in my mind. Ms. Reynolds had adapted her teaching style significantly, moving cautiously but deliberately, with a careful attention to student needs and a newfound humility. There was a tangible change in her demeanor, a subtle but meaningful recognition of the responsibility teachers carry, not just to educate, but to protect, respect, and understand the students in their care. It was a small but important lesson in accountability. Mistakes, even those born of assumption, could have real consequences, and acknowledging them was the first step toward growth. For me, the experience had transformed from a source of fear into a cornerstone of personal development. I had learned to navigate environments that were once overwhelming with confidence, care, and foresight. My routines, managing my insulin pump, wearing headphones, and maintaining composure under scrutiny, had become second nature. But more than that, I had learned resilience, the ability to act decisively under pressure, and the importance of trusting my instincts. The day that had once seemed like a nightmare now felt like a testament to my own strength and the support of those who had been there for me, my parents, the school staff, and even some empathetic classmates. The administration's response also left a lasting impact. Policies regarding student safety, teacher training, and emergency protocols were permanently updated, ensuring that no other student would experience the same dangerous misunderstanding. The school community began to embrace a culture of awareness and empathy, encouraging teachers and students alike to understand each other's circumstances before jumping to assumptions. I realized that my experience, while deeply personal, had helped foster positive change for countless others. What had begun as a terrifying incident had become a catalyst for progress, shaping the way authority and care coexisted in the school environment. Socially, the classroom returned to a balance of normalcy and caution. My peers and I had learned to navigate both friendship and vigilance, finding moments of laughter and connection amid the awareness of potential risks. While the story of the incident remained in whispered conversations and occasional reflections, it no longer carried the same sense of panic. Instead, it became a shared lesson about responsibility, empathy, and the power of remaining calm in moments of crisis. I noticed how the experience had subtly strengthened bonds among students, creating a quieter, more considerate classroom culture. The emotional growth I experienced extended beyond the school environment. I became more mindful in everyday interactions, more empathetic toward others, and more confident in advocating for myself. Situations that once would have caused anxiety or hesitation were now approached with a sense of preparedness. I had learned to anticipate challenges, respond decisively, and maintain emotional composure, even when circumstances felt uncertain or potentially threatening. It was a skill set that extended far beyond the classroom, shaping my approach to life in subtle but meaningful ways. Looking back, I realized the incident had provided me with an extraordinary perspective on safety, responsibility, and human behavior. The memory of the scissors, the beeping insulin pump, and the rush to the nurse's office remained vivid, but it was no longer a source of fear. Instead, it served as a reminder of the importance of awareness, the value of preparation, and the incredible capacity for resilience that exists within each of us. I had faced a potentially life-threatening situation and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable of navigating the unexpected challenges that life inevitably presents. By the end of the school year, the sense of resolution was tangible. Ms. Reynolds had accepted her accountability. The administration had implemented lasting changes, and I had regained a sense of agency and confidence that had been shaken but never broken. The experience had left an indelible mark, shaping my perspective, my actions, and my understanding of both authority and vulnerability. It had taught me that mistakes can have consequences, but that growth, understanding, and resilience can emerge from even the most terrifying moments. Ultimately, I had learned that life is unpredictable, authority is fallible, and preparedness is a skill that can save not only one's physical safety, but also one's peace of mind. I walked away from that experience with a renewed sense of self, a deep appreciation for vigilance and empathy, and a clear understanding that even in the most ordinary settings, like a classroom, extraordinary lessons can be learned, resilience can be cultivated, and courage can emerge in the face of fear.